54 years ago, Errol Flynn's kid disappeared into the Cambodian forest. What actually transpired has been revealed by startling new evidence. The terrible truth has finally come to light, thanks to long-buried witness accounts, secret government archives, and a mother who spent her whole fortune looking for answers. This is the true account of how Hollywood nobility vanished forever in Cambodia's killing fields, complete with mass graves, CIA allegations, and phony medical records. But first, let's quickly examine Errol Flynn's animals. Flynn had no intention of becoming a Hollywood star. He didn't really plan anything at all. He was restless from birth, having been born in Tasmania. He was expelled from every school he attended, and by the time he was in his teens he was already hopping jobs. He tried everything, including managing a tobacco farm, working on plantations, and mining copper, but nothing stayed. It was clear that he didn't desire a typical existence. Flynn did possess charm, good looks, and a spirit of adventure. He stood out due to his height, remarkable appearance, and untamed enthusiasm. He found himself in England one day while going about his daily business as normal. Things began to alter at that point. By coincidence, he landed a little acting job, and all of a sudden people took attention. He had something you couldn't teach him, but he wasn't trained. After a quick glance, Hollywood summoned him in. He received a role in Captain Blood, a costume, and a sword from Warner Brothers. No one had high expectations. However, when the film was released in 1935, Flynn made a huge splash. He was adored by audiences. His roguish grin made men applaud and women melt. He was courageous and bold. He became one of the most well-known people in the world overnight. It was hit after hit from that point on. The Seahawk, Robin Hood, and his adventures all perished wearing their boots. Flynn was more than simply a hero. On film he became one. He was the romantic, the swashbuckler, and the guy who never shied away from a challenge. The funny thing was that he was as insane off-screen. His private life was in disarray. He broke more rules than he obeyed, partied too hard, and drank too much. He was erratic, constantly seeking thrills and testing boundaries. For it he was adored by some. He was despised by others. However, he was not disregarded. Trouble began to catch up as the years went by. He was surrounded by scandals. He experienced financial difficulties, health issues, and legal issues. The studios started to become impatient. The limelight dimmed and the roles shrank. Flynn didn't stop, though. He relocated to Europe, continued performing, and had an extravagant life till the death. Not simply because of the movies, but also because of his lifestyle. He left a legacy, charming, careless, and constantly seeking the next adventure. "I've had a heck of a lot of fun," he once said, "and I have relished every moment of it." And that is just how he is remembered. Sean Flynn, however, was raised in a milieu of war and celebrity. Errol Flynn, his father, was a legendary figure in Hollywood. When Sean came in 1941, his mother, Lily Demita, a French actress, was already experiencing marital disintegration. Errol was much younger than Lily, who had gotten pregnant on purpose. She was aware that having a kid would permanently bind her to Errol. Sean was more than a baby from the start. He was a pawn in a savage conflict between two powerful individuals. After the divorce, his parents continued to argue. In an attempt to keep Sean away from Hollywood and Errol's crazy lifestyle, Lily relocated to Florida, across the nation. She interfered with Errol's ability to visit his son, and altered arrangements frequently. Lily refused to back down, even when Errol withheld money in an attempt to exert pressure on her. She maintained her control at all times. She spent years attempting to destroy Errol in court, because she still harbored twisted affections for him. Sean struggled to love his parents, while he watched one of them despise the other. The difference was startling when Sean went to see Errol. Life was rigid and respectable with his mother. It was exciting and risky with his father. He cruised the Caribbean and the Mediterranean during the summers on Errol's yacht. He swam in the water, visited Jamaica, and observed his father leading a pirate's life. During one trip, Sean arrived with a rifle after a brawl broke out on the boat, and assured Errol that everything was under control. Everything was stated in that instant. Lily had brought up a well-mannered young guy. He had become brave, courageous, and maybe even reckless as a result of Errol. Sean never really fit in at school. He was originally sent to a California military school by Lily. He continued pleading to go home since he detested it. After a while, she transferred him to a private school in New Jersey, after first sending him to one in Florida. His grades, however, were dismal. Books didn't interest him. He enjoyed photography, ladies' parties, and athletics. He probably didn't want to acknowledge it, but he was more like his father. He never forgot the treachery that followed. Sean had a young girlfriend when he was a teenager. He lost her to Errol. Beverly Adland, Errol's notorious teenage girlfriend, is said to have been the girl. He was never forgiven by Sean. Years later, right before he vanished in Cambodia, he discussed it. At one time, he had admired his father. Then something changed. The connection was severed. The pain was profound. Sean started attending Duke University in 1960. He immediately stood out. Compared to the other pupils, he had more life experience and was more mature. Taking advantage of his father's infamous reputation, he campaigned for class president with the slogan, "You're in with Flynn." He won with ease. He didn't remain long though. He nearly had to travel to Vietnam after losing his draft deferment. Lily arranged for him to have a medical reason. Soon after leaving Duke, he was chosen to star in a film that would serve as the beginning of his acting career. The Son of Captain Blood was the title. The filming process was difficult. Sean was just 20. English was not the director's first language. They were unable to speak. Sean, however, remained composed and did his best. He learned how to fight and fall on screen from one of his father's former stuntmen. In actuality, the film did well and was well received by viewers. For a time it appeared that Sean may indeed become another Errol. He landed another significant part in the Cold War drama Stop Train 349. He and Jose Ferrer co-starred. It was a serious and stressful narrative. Sean wasn't prepared for it though. He appeared practically flawless on camera. He sounded stiff though, as if he were reading lines for the first time, according to reviewers. Nevertheless, the film received respect. Later, it was also utilized for training by the U.S. Army. Sean continued to appear in European motion pictures, often low-budget westerns and adventure dramas. He received gigs just because he was really attractive. However, he wasn't satisfied with the job. He sacrificed everything to get to Africa in 1964. He was a wildlife warden and safari guide. He went hunting. He led a crazy life. However, as his funds dried up, he went back to Europe and produced a few more movies. One of them was a twin sisters co-star. He was not pleased with any of them. He saved enough money for a comfortable Parisian lifestyle. After a while, he completely ceased acting. He portrayed a U.S. Marine in his last movie, a B flick that was filmed in Singapore. Although the movie wasn't very good, Sean appeared more at ease and less like he was acting. Instead, he looked to have accepted who he was. He left Hollywood for good shortly after. Sean Flynn took a daring choice in 1965. He traveled to Africa, leaving behind the world of cinema. Errol Flynn, his father, was a legendary figure in Hollywood. Sean, however, was not interested in going down the same route. He had attempted to act. He had attended the University of Duke. He had even appeared in a few of movies. It didn't feel right though. He was not excited by Hollywood. It was phony. Thus he prepared his belongings and traveled to Kenya. Everything changed in Africa. He was no one's son there. He wasn't an actor. He was only a guy in the wild. He was a hunter and a game warden. He gained knowledge about bush survival and assisted with conservation, instead of being staged as in movies. The threat was genuine. Sean felt liberated for the first time. What he was doing was important to him. He was in command. He was able to discover his true self in the African bush. He stayed in contact with his mother, Lily Demita, back home. His letters described a young guy who was attempting to fend for himself. He praised her for always being there in one 1958 letter. He declared his love for her. However, he also clarified something. He was opposed to being forced into Hollywood. He wrote that the movie company and his father could all burn in hell if they wanted him to be an actor. He only wanted to spend time with his loved ones. A few days later, he wrote once more, expressing his desire to work piling cement for $50 a week. He said that was all he required for happiness. They were more than words. They demonstrated a strong desire to live his life as he saw fit, even if it meant eschewing wealth and celebrity. Sean was prepared to begin a new chapter by 1966. In order to get some cash, he had produced 2 spaghetti westerns in Spain. He used that money to purchase a Leica camera. It turned into his pass to a new persona. He traveled to Vietnam in January as a freelance photographer, rather than an actor. After working with Time Life and United Press International, he began with Paris Match. Sean did not remain on the sidelines as other journalists did. He went on combat missions. He spent time with Nung mercenaries and Green Berets. Others shied away from the dangers he took. His images began to circulate throughout the globe. At last he had the impression that he was actually accomplishing something. He was out of the shadow of his father. He was creating a moniker for himself that had personal significance. He sustained injuries only 2 months during his stay in Vietnam. While taking field photos, he injured his knee. However, the injuries did not deter him. If anything, it strengthened his resolve. They were attacked by Viet Cong insurgents in April. While on patrol with the Green Berets, Sean was doing more than simply snapping photos. He had an M16 gun with him. He had to struggle to stay alive. He later stated that he believed they would all perish, yet they survived. And he was no longer only a journalist after that. He participated in the activity. In contrast to most journalists, Sean Flynn did not enter the Vietnam War. He carried more than just a camera. He arrived with the appearance of someone who belonged on the front lines. He had eyes that made people pause and stare, and he was tall and blonde. His attire, however, was what truly caught people's attention. Incredibly, he had 4 grenades dangling from his vest, full army fatigues, and a combat harness, actual ones. And they weren't even securely taped. Other reporters were taken aback when he entered the Saigon Time Bureau in such manner at the beginning of 1966. Jim Wilde, one of them, reprimanded him right away. A slight bump may have detonated the bombs. Sean was unaware of the risk. Not even military ranks were familiar to him. He previously said that he couldn't distinguish between a colonel and a major. In actuality, he had no knowledge of actual fighting, and had gotten around the conscription by using a phony medical note. But in some way, troops began to revere him in spite of his deadly stupidity. He had the appropriate appearance. He pretended to fit in, and he did in due time. As a freelance photojournalist, Sean had been to Vietnam and secured modest jobs with well-known companies like Paris Match. His fighting images began to round the world within days of his arrival. His ability to remain composed and focused in the midst of mayhem was something that most photographers lacked. He had previously had a knee injury while out taking pictures for a mission in only 2 months. He continued. His images were honest and unvarnished. In one of his most well-known images, a Viet Cong soldier who had shot a little girl was being tortured by US forces. It wasn't attractive. However, it was genuine and revealed the war's evil side. Flynn had been performing in Spanish spaghetti westerns not long before all of this. He purchased his first Leica M2 camera there. The same camera was capturing some of the most dramatic battle photos of the time only a few months later. By the end of 1966, military leaders trusted him so much that they allowed him to observe actions up close that most journalists could only imagine. Sean didn't stop there, either. He wasn't happy to observe from a distance. He joined elite groups, namely the US Special Forces. He trained with them, lived with them, and accompanied them into the forest. He even made a spectacular leap from an aircraft with the 101st Airborne Division, entering a conflict zone by parachuting only to take better pictures. He wasn't bragging. He firmly felt that you had to experience war firsthand if you wanted to speak the truth about it. He shown his willingness to go to great lengths on one trip in April 1966. He ended up with an M16 in his hands, firing back when his group was ambushed and troops were murdered. He then stated that he believed they would all perish. However, he continued to take photos. He was a journalist and soldier at the same time. His pictures seemed distinct from everyone else's because of this. Instead of coming from the periphery, they were at the center of the activity. Sean, however, never feigned a passion for war. What appealed to him was the challenge, the risk, and the ability to remain composed in the face of chaos. He previously claimed that he believed his ability to perform well under pressure was his true strength. His ability to remain awake, calm, and concentrated while others sought shelter became his trademark. His perspective on photography evolved over time. He returned to Vietnam in 1968 with a more ambitious plan. He no longer only wanted to take pictures, he wanted to produce a documentary. He wanted to share the whole tale. He felt it was the responsibility of photographers to capture the unpleasant, brutal reality. It was precisely how it was, not watered down, not tidied up. That conviction kept him going until the day he vanished. Flynn and colleague journalist Dana Stone mounted motorbikes and entered Cambodia on April 6, 1970. They were searching for another tale, another reality that they want to document. They vanished from view. The cause of the incident is yet unknown. However, Sean Flynn was already a legend at that point. It wasn't simply the risks he took that set him apart. It has to do with his demeanor. People thought he would follow in the footsteps of his father, the well-known actor Errol Flynn, exuberant, wild, and always pursuing women. Sean, however, wasn't that way. He was reserved, quiet, and kind. He was bashful yet courteous among ladies. People were taken aback by his composed manner, but it also highlighted his bravery. He didn't say much. He just accomplished great things. He was a member of an unofficial gang of combat photographers who were notorious for taking significant risks in order to obtain the story, such as Henry Hewitt, Tim Page, and Dana Stone. To catch the moment, they would travel anywhere, even into actual conflict. Sean, however, remained aside from them. Something deeper, something profound, was in him. Later, when studying Tao Buddhism in Bali, he found serenity. He had been a safari guide in Africa prior to Vietnam. He was a skilled shooter. He knew how to live in the wilderness. He was difficult to define because of all these factors. He was more than just an adventurer. He was unique, perhaps a silent warrior who carried a camera rather than a sword. Being viewed as merely his father's son was something Sean Flynn never desired. Errol Flynn was a daring cinema star who embodied both danger and wild charm. Sean was hoping for something different, but a 1966 snapshot altered that. It displayed a tormented and restrained prisoner. Sean took the photo in Vietnam because he thought it conveyed a significant tale about a prisoner who had reportedly shot a little child. However, that detail was soon forgotten. People didn't pay attention to the photo's backstory. They concentrated on the picture. All of a sudden, Sean was more than a journalist. Like his father, he was a thrill seeker and daredevil. He was plagued by this mistake. Instead of becoming a myth about war, he aimed to portray its reality. However, he appeared to get more and more enmeshed in his father's shadow, the more he attempted to escape it. But he continued. He continued to take wartime photos. Additionally, he was recording while he wasn't snapping photos. Sean had begun filming a documentary that would portray the battle in its truest form. He had video, interviews, anecdotes, and fragments of a jigsaw that he never managed to complete. Sean was in Cambodia in the beginning of April 1970. There was a civil war. Tensions were rapidly increasing. He had breakfast at Hotel Le Ponum with fellow journalist Dana Stone on the morning of April 6. It was a magnificent location, crowded with reporters, yet the atmosphere was tense. They discussed a checkpoint on Highway 1, close to the Vietnamese border, over breakfast and coffee. Rumor had claimed that the Viet Cong had orchestrated it. Sean felt it was much more crucial to check out, because it seemed risky. He was cautioned by friends not to go. They had recently conducted a military coup. There was instability in the neighborhood. Along the same route, other journalists had vanished, but Sean had decided to go. He and Dana made the decision to depart Phnom Penh at 9 o'clock, making a detour to explore the checkpoint on the way to Saigon. The majority of reporters traveled in armored vehicles, not Sean. Motorcycles, in his opinion, were superior, quicker, and more adaptable. If it became worse, he thought they could get away. He and Dana paid $15 apiece to rent 2 red Honda motorcycles that morning. They were dubbed the Easy Riders by someone as they fastened their cameras. They chuckled. They then rode off at around 11:15 a.m. They were spotted once more, This time on camera, at around 1:30 p.m., they were spotted close to a checkpoint on Highway 1 by a French television team. They were conversing with other reporters. Sean gestured toward a white vehicle parked close by. Reporters who had previously been apprehended owned it. Nevertheless, he appeared composed, even thrilled. They were going to speak with the Viet Cong, he claimed. Another journalist, Steve Bell, cautioned him once more, but Sean ignored him. After 15 minutes, Sean and Dana mounted their bikes once more and headed in the direction of the checkpoint. They were last captured on camera, alive at that point. Witnesses told what transpired next. When two Western males were spotted, a gang of armed guerrillas halted the farmers and locals. They dragged the men off their motorcycles. They lost their cameras. Sean made an effort to clarify that they were reporters. The captors showed little concern. Both males had been bound. Dana remained silent as Sean argued, according to a youngster observing from a distance. After that, they were led into the woods. A vehicle was loaded with their equipment. The checkpoint was gone by 3 p.m., Dana and Sean were too. The news community immediately took note when Sean Flynn and Dana Stone failed to return to Phnom Penh on April 6, 1970. These reporters were well known, and their abrupt quiet raised suspicions. They missed a significant news conference in Saigon the same evening. This added a sense of gravity. One of the last to see them, Steve Bell, became increasingly anxious by the hour. Time magazine and CBS News had been notified by dusk. Then there was more awful news. At the same checkpoint, 4 other journalists had disappeared on the same day. There was obviously a problem. A team of reporters quickly established a crisis center at Saigon's Continental Hotel. There, they got together to exchange what little knowledge they did have. The next morning, the U.S. Embassy in Cambodia was formally notified. One of the biggest journalistic hunts of the Vietnam War era began with that. Reporters didn't just wait around, they took immediate action. Some returned to the former Highway 1 checkpoint where Flynn and Stone were last spotted. They swept the region with the assistance of armed guards. Tim Page, a British photojournalist who was close to both men, put a halt to everything and took charge of civilian search parties. He examined every lead, talked to locals, and offered prizes. Joining in were U.S. Special Forces, who had previously worked with Flynn. In search of any clue, they went in helicopters over the bush. They discovered something at the end of the week. A few kilometers off the road, Flynn and Stone had concealed their bikes in shrubs. Stories that the guys were taken alive were supported by the fact that the motorcycles were undamaged. However, the hunt became increasingly risky as it moved farther into Cambodia. Communist troops even temporarily arrested and detained 2 members of one search party. Sean Flynn's mother, Lily Demita, was informed on April 8. She used to be a well-known actress, and Errol Flynn's ex-wife as well. She acted immediately upon hearing it. She had a group of detectives and a ton of money when she boarded a private jet to Southeast Asia in 3 days. On April 11, she arrived in Saigon and made her home at the Caravel Hotel. She made a $25,000 incentive offer right away. In a matter of days, that number doubled. She continued after that. To go as near to the last known site as possible, she engaged local guides. People were astonished to see Demita. It was unprecedented for a 66-year-old lady to travel into a conflict zone, but she was resolute and had the resources to continue. She spent the most of her wealth over the years in an attempt to locate her son. She established an informant network in Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. She also maintained a strong relationship with Dana Stone's family, particularly his wife Louise, who was in Phnom Penh when the men disappeared. Diplomats searched as families did. The U.S. State Department began working behind the scenes within 2 days of the disappearance. Operation Newshound was a covert expedition authorized by Secretary of State William Rogers. It attempted to communicate with the Khmer Rouge and Viet Cong, and linked American embassies around the area, due of their connections in Hanoi, Sweden, and India, were invited to assist in Washington. A special task group was established, and it met every day to review reports. In an attempt to obtain authorization to access areas controlled by the enemy, the Red Cross even became engaged. Eventually, a few journalists were brought back. They did not include Stone and Flynn. Nowadays, the most widely believed view is that Vietnamese communists initially captured Flynn and Stone. They had leased motorcycles and departed Phnom Penh on April 6 in search of tails. At a checkpoint close to Sa Phirieng, they were last spotted. Nearby, there were indications of Viet Cong troops. In an attempt to speak with the combatants, the two men headed directly for the checkpoint, despite the danger. They were brought into the forest after being removed from their motorcycles, according to witnesses. This was later verified by CIA archives. Vietnamese military had grabbed them and detained them for a number of months. They were turned over to the Khmer Rouge at the end of 1970. This was consistent with the time period. The Vietnamese were gradually handing up power to their friends in Cambodia. Flynn and Stone were probably detained at a jungle camp known as Xuis, which was one of the locations utilized for this. A Khmer Rouge defector provided fresh information years later. Pen Sovan was his name. He said that in the middle of 1970, senior Khmer Rouge officials informed him that the two journalists were being imprisoned at the XU camp. There was a multilingual guy named Premuth, who served as the commander. Flynn and Stone were seen by the Khmer Rouge as CIA operatives. That label was lethal. In February 1971, the guys attempted to flee according to intelligence reports. It didn't work. Later that year they were put to death. According to Sovan, two guys subsequently dug up the dead and attempted to sell the remains to the government of Cambodia. Tim Page never gave up. Long after the battle was over, he continued to search. He disclosed in 1991 that Flynn and Stone had been brought to Sa Kong, a hamlet, and then relocated. He discovered two sets of bones, one tall and one short, in a small burial in Bay Met. Although it appeared to be a breakthrough, further DNA testing revealed the bones weren't those of Flynn and Stone. They belonged to two males who were involved in another incident. Concerned that amateur treasure seekers would destroy legitimate graveyards, Page continued. Then an odd turn of events occurred. Two individuals, David McMillan and Keith Rotherham, claimed to have located Flynn's remains in 2010. They were only explorers, not specialists. They had heard a story from a local peasant about the murder and burial of a blonde immigrant. The location in Pekai Adong was dug up by local laborers and bulldozers. Page was among the irate critics. This search was improper. It was careless, and it was said that the two guys were attempting to pitch the tale to the press. Nevertheless, they gave U.S. officials the bones they had discovered. DNA testing was finished a few months later. June 2010 saw the outcomes. Sean Flynn did not own the bones. They really belonged to a Southeast Asian person. That probe was permanently terminated by the test. DNA Stone and Sean Flynn are still unaccounted for. Most people think the Khmer Rouge put them to death in 1971. However, the mystery remains enigmatic, unsolved, and memorable in the absence of concrete evidence.